Hello, and welcome to Coherence. I'm your host, Joey Greiner. Coherence is a show where we talk about living authentically to your life's purpose, to exploring what it is to find your true calling and to find a balance in your life in what you love to do, what you're good at, what's good for the world, and what you can get paid to do. And tonight I am joined by Daniel Ryan, who is a hypnotherapist and past life regression therapist, and he has a very interesting set of skills that I got to experience firsthand today in a session, and I'm excited to dig deeper into these topics and to share all about it. So thank you so much, Dan, for joining us today.
Hey, Joey, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
It is a pleasure. So uh, let's start with the basics of hypnotherapy, which is your main focus of expertise. Can you give us a standardized definition of what the practice entails?
Of course, of course. Hypnosis and hypnotherapy having a great deal of bad PR, years, decades really of bad PR behind them as subjects. Hypnotherapy and clinical hypnosis, as it's usually offered, is really quite similar to meditation. We might think of it as a guided meditation with a specific goal and a great deal of technique, a specific vocabulary that is usually based upon the vocabulary actually of the person having the experience, more so than the therapist or hypnotist guiding the experience. And I really enjoy my truly most accurate and favorite way to think of it is as a brain training and the
Mm,
positive psychology of how you want to feel during performance. That is the true purpose of it, is to access the neurology and physiology of the states of flow, relaxation, calm, confidence, whatever words we want to use there, but
yeah.
the actual physiology of peak performance. And then, to use a metaphor, copy paste it to these other contexts and other times and areas of our lives to start it as a process that the person can take with them after the session, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that actually does make a lot of sense. And in our conversation earlier, I thought it was really interesting the correlation you made between meditation and hypnosis, and then later past life regression therapy. We can get into regression later, but if you could just speak to the correlation between meditation and hypnosis a little bit more,
Of
that would be
course,
really
yeah.
cool.
Yeah, thank you. It's actually the subject of my first book, which is called Meditation, Hypnosis, and Past Life Regression. And there's a
Apt.
metaphor, yes, there's a metaphor that I use to help the reader and to help anybody really understand their relationship. That meditation we can consider a glass of water, hypnosis is a swimming pool, and past life regression is an ocean. And that they are essentially made of the same thing, it's water, as we are mostly water.
Hmm.
But the glass of water in meditation, it's small, it's simple, it's contained, it's refreshing. It's there, it's momentary, the way we will sit for 2 minutes or 20 minutes or however long the interval is, but that it's contained in the glass of water. Then in hypnosis, we widen the capacity, we widen the container. And in a swimming pool, we can go into the deep end, the way we can go into deep trance, we can stay close to the surface and shallow states of trance, which are very often kind of the states that you and I were talking about earlier as well today. And that we can play in this larger space, that we can go into the past, the future, deep, shallow, etc. And then in past life regression, we have an ocean where it's deep, it's wide, it's infinite, it's mysterious, it's beautiful, it's treacherous. We don't know what's going to happen when we go searching because it's wild in that way, and that's part of why we do it. But that's what will happen in past life regression too, where we are working with spiritual material. In many ways we're poking at the mystery, many of them. So I use this metaphor of the glass of water, the swimming pool, and the ocean. We could also think of, I've described meditation to you before as the seed of these other experiences,
Hmm.
which I also believe that, the observation and meditation of our thoughts, of the mind, of the monkey mind, as we sometimes call it,
Yeah.
that muscle is foundational to success in hypnosis and past life regression and perhaps all inner work. So yeah, so looking at the relationship between them has been a big part of my personal experience with these tools that have helped me through life, but also working with them and sharing with them with others.
Yeah. So this afternoon we had a session together, And that was my first experience ever with hypnosis or past life regression therapy. And we definitely covered a lot of ground, and it was a very interesting experience for me. And we had a great chat before and after. And as you describe the similarities between meditation and hypnosis, as I've mentioned before in our conversation and in many previous episodes of the show, I have a daily meditation practice for some time now. And that's definitely part of my routine that I feel is very important to me. And initially, right now, it's there's a Kundalini yoga mantra that I do daily, but also I'm doing a mindfulness practice where I am just trying to focus on quieting out the monkey mind and
Mm,
not attaching too much to thoughts, just letting them go and just being present and trying to really distinguish what is my own thoughts and what is a movie that I saw a week ago, or an article that I read in a magazine a few days ago, or something that I need to do tomorrow just popping up into my head. And I try to detach from those thoughts and then get back to a place of calm. And before I was doing this type of mindfulness meditation for years, I always thought meditation was just following along with a guided meditation.
sure.
And that was my experience of what meditation was for many years, like listening to a teacher or a recording of visualizing things. And in my personal experience, I've always had difficulty imagining scenarios and visualizing things, as we discussed in our session earlier today. Like, if the meditation teacher would say, visualize the most peaceful place you've ever been, it would take me a while to get there. And I felt like our hypnotherapy session, or the hypnotism that you were leading me through, was very similar to a guided meditation. Uh,
They have similar ingredients. They're essentially the same. It often now. I mean, there's distinctions to be made here because, to your point of exposure to things, some people, for natural reasons at no fault of their own, I'm sure do think meditation is purely a recording where you listen to somebody else guide you on a nice little experience and you take some breaths. That might
mhm,
be it. But of course, meditation and its many ancient traditions and philosophies from all over the world. It is said that the best reason to meditate often is for no reason at all. And
mm,
that, the original, quote unquote, original intention of meditation was not to do it to feel better or for a reason, to relieve anxiety, for instance, but to actually step out of that wheel of good and bad, to step out of the commentary of this is what I want, this is good, this is what I don't want, this is bad, this thought is, pure and clean, or this one's dirty, or I hate this and I don't like that. So to actually step out of that wheel that apparently even thousands of years people were caught up in. So, that idea, which I remind myself in the groups I work with around meditation very often, that idea I feel is very lost oftentimes in, and I participate in this. So I don't mean to sound like I'm casting judgment or anything, really just reminding myself, and I feel it's important that we all continue to remember where these things come from, that there is a wellness marketplace where meditation is something we buy and sell, and
mhm.
that it has these prices associated with it, when in fact it's sitting in the chair with our eyes closed if we just remember, you know and it's free.
Yep.
And that, and all of these other things that uh, are just reminders more than anything else. Now, having a good teacher, very important. Good company, essential. I don't know that a person's meditation practice could be clean and really, well, I don't know, I shouldn't make too many assumptions, but just that having good teachers is important, So I'm not saying we shouldn't pay for good teachers and good classes and educate ourselves and stuff like that. Just kind of remembering the full context of meditation. And then to your original statement, yeah, they're very similar. The ingredients of hypnosis, hypnosis too, really being born, classical hypnosis was born in the 1800s in the same hospitals and medical theaters of Paris and London that, you know, female hysteria was very common as a diagnosis in it. And, you know, just the barbaric origins of healthcare and mental health,
Yeah.
you know, that's where hypnosis begins too. So, you know, before that, centuries before that, we have meditation and various other forms of inner work. And, you know, past life regression, then by comparison, born in the late 1970s, around the same time I was.
Hmm.
And, you know, so many tools of inner work and modalities, good and bad. Scientology is part of this too. You know, begin in the late or second half of the 20th century, that have ingredients of things that came before them. So, you know, there's actually an extraordinarily deep and rich history that I think is unwritten here, Joey. You know, that follows this narrative of these tools.
Yeah, and you touch on some of these topics in your book.
Absolutely.
Okay.
It's yeah, and you know, yeah, I'm working on it, man. I'm working on it.
Yeah, and I'm curious. Are there some other works out there that if we wanted to look more into the history of hypnosis and hypnotherapy,
Well, there's
anything you'd
many,
recommend?
yeah, there's a lot of great books about the, you know, characters and origins here. You know, we were talking a little while ago about a documentary called The Century of the Self
Yeah.
by Adam Curtis, which I recommend to everybody. You can find it on YouTube. Just Google Century of the Self. Um, but that series talks about Edward Bernays, Sigmund Freud's nephew, and his tremendous role in starting the PR industry in the 20th century here in the United States, applying to you know, the psychology of buying and selling a lot of the lessons of World War II in the 1940s. And that documentary is an excellent historical review, just kind of that period, and also would give one a new lens, you know, on advertising, not vilifying anything, just again telling the history. And then
Yeah.
Medical Muses is a great book by Asti Hustvedt about some of those asylums in Paris
Oh yeah.
and the medical hospitals, and tells a lot of that history from the 1800s. And there's a book by Adam Phillips called Young Freud, which talks about Freud's early life, which isn't written about much. Um, Dr. Muter's Marvels is another one. There's not a great one about the history of hypnosis. You know, that's the one that's not like the next one I'm writing, but it's a
Hmm.
book I absolutely have in me, that I'm slowly compiling information on. But I haven't found that book yet that I could point you to.
Well, there you go. It's forthcoming.
That's right. That's right.
Excellent. So, let's talk about how you got into hypnosis and hypnotherapy.
Yes.
Yeah. So, your father was a long-standing practitioner and one of the pioneers in the fields
Of regression therapy, yes.
specifically regression therapy.
Yeah. Also
So,
hypnosis in his own unique way, but more specifically regression therapy. And hypnosis and past life regression are the family business.
mhm.
And my dad was Jeffrey Ryan was his name. He passed away in 2011. And he was first taught hypnosis by the US military in the late 1950s. Like I mentioned to you before, Joey, his life is infinitely more interesting than mine. I'm a guy from New Jersey. You know,
Yeah.
like my work is more interesting than I am too, ultimately, but his
Mhm.
life is a hell of a story.
Well, that could be
Uh,
another book as well.
yeah, trust me, man. That one's somewhere in the pipeline too. But he was an orphan who grew up outside Boston in the 1940s, and eventually in the military he was adopted before that by the
Mhm.
Ryans, whose last name I have, and yeah, joined the army. And in his late teens, early 20s, was working with hypnosis in, well, certainly one of the original contexts where it would have been used as a counseling tool in the United States. He was working with hypnosis, helping Korean War vets overcome PTSD and then,
Mm.
you know, post-traumatic stress from the war. So, you know, he was doing this in a military setting, and I can't, you know, I can think of examples in Europe, again, going back to the 1800s, but this had to have been among the first times in the US, you know, especially in the military. Uh, but you know, he may or may not have been part of programs like MK Ultra, But
Yeah.
I don't. I honestly, I wish he was still around to ask him these questions, of course. But I don't think he was involved in anything that spooky. But I could be wrong. Could be
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah, we never know. I mean, that's a thread that I'd love to pull on, but I wasn't planning to this early in the talk. But you know what? Since you brought it up, let's go for it.
Sure. Yeah.
So MK Ultra, for those who might not have heard of it, was a experiment run by the United States military on mind control. And my understanding is that there was a journalist, I believe, French, that printed an article saying that the Russians were already working on a mind control project. So the Americans started putting a lot of resources into studying mind control and psychological warfare. In response to this uh, satirical article, and then that led to an arms race of psychological warfare between the United States and the Soviet Union in the 1950s, 60s, continuing through the 70s, when they say those programs were disbanded, but more likely just renamed.
It
So,
is, and I mean, it's worth the asking, even without needing to get into the cloak and dagger. What do we think the legacy of these programs would be, even, because I mean, again, I'm thinking now more of things like the social dilemma and our current problems amongst, with social media, really, and the usage of data, our own data against us, and, the sociology that is harnessed, because to my knowledge, most of the results of those experiments were either tragic or embarrassing.
yeah,
It's what what comes out of it, and the legacy of those, perhaps the dark legacy of those experiments, which again, I don't know if my dad had any involvement in those. And we'll get to mind control as a specific thing. um, but I think that the legacy of those experiments is not great. and
yeah,
and if and if they yielded anything, or if the names were just changed, again, I think we see it more used in marketing and messaging and things like that. I think it's because the fact of the matter, and I'm not even saying there's a villain necessarily, just that there is a nuance to the sociology of this uh, that is delicate, and you need to, in order to be able to work with it, you need certain things. Um, and I don't think these experiments in the military ever got beyond their own goofiness in many cases.
I think some of them also led to some of the um, horrible things that happened in like Guantanamo Bay and Abu Ghraib, something like that. I've had friends in the military say that when they're stationed at certain borders or checkpoints, that like loud, obnoxious music would be blasted in the direction of the enemy and stuff like that. So there's definitely different psychological warfare elements that have been gleaned from that are still in use today.
Yeah, and listen, I mean, the difference there, it's just so important, the distinction, because again, you know, hypnosis and regression therapy are, or at least hypnosis as a hypnotherapy. These are therapeutic modalities that happen in a very specific context in a professional's office, where there's a great deal of safety, trust, and freedom, and so that work can happen in an intimate setting between two people. And that can be appropriate, professional, and effective. When we start talking about the context of warfare, or the marketplace, this is just completely different, completely different. So even if they're the same principles we're talking about, everything does need to be slightly recontextualized. And I know that's obvious to say, but it's important to say, because the language around hypnosis is so shitty, the vocabulary is so broken, that it takes a lot of over explaining. The yeah, again, hypnosis, as a subject. You know, stage hypnosis and clinical hypnosis should not have the same name. That is just confusing to the average person. And oftentimes people do change the names, but then we have to learn what the new thing means.
Yeah.
So,
So, what you just the way you just phrased that kind of reminded me of what we think of culturally as the tropes of hypnosis, as like someone sitting on a couch with a pocket watch, moving it back and forth in front of your eyes, kind of puts you in a trance state.
I've got some pendulums in my office just in case. Yeah.
Yeah. Was that a big part of the early days of hypnosis and hypnotherapy, or just
Those tropes in media, Joey, are usually the kind of thing where it's like a grain of salt that has, or I should say, a grain of truth, but it's surrounded by all kinds of fictitious, dramatized stuff. So, you know, for instance, the watch. First of all, I think there's a couple we could name, not that they're well known, but, you know, hypnotists use that as a trope, so that's a trope. But it's not about the watch, it's about drawing people's attention. You know, if I told you to just let your attention rest on this spot on my wall, just let your eyes rest there. And, you know, I mean, if we just create a point of attention for the gaze to rest on, and then begin to take deep breaths and begin to introduce certain suggestions and introduce certain cues, a person's nervous system will usually start to have certain responses. So it's less about the watch and more about where we're drawing attention and what we're drawing attention to. If I can use another example, the movie Get Out. Did you see Get Out?
Yes.
Great movie. You know,
Yes,
Catherine Keener plays a hypnotist.
Mm-hmm.
Her character, do you remember her clinking her spoon against her teacup as a way?
And she's doing it throughout the film to kind of program him.
Right. So the clinking of the spoon on the teacup is what we would call a hypnotic anchor. Hypnotic anchors exist in many other contexts. Anytime you have a comic who's got a line, like Rodney Dangerfield, and I can't get no respect or something like that. But anytime you got a comedian who's got a line they come back to, that's their anchor. You know, so the hypnotic anchor is something that's very real, that you're giving a person consciously or unconsciously. There are a lot of ways of doing this that are indirect and very clever and very helpful to the client, actually, where you can create these anchors that can, you know, be a reminder to their nervous system to relax or calm or take a deep breath or whatever it might be. But, you know, in this movie, it's an anchor for the kid to fall into this horrible place. I can't remember what it's called.
I think it's like the dark place or something like that.
Something like that.
The upside down in Stranger Things. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So anyway, it's a trigger for him to go into this horrible experience, and, you know, it's dramatized in the movie because it's a movie and it's a horror movie, and Jordan Peele's an awesome writer and director, you know, so it's great.
Absolutely. But
that's the grain of truth, is the hypnotic anchor, you know, and the rest is the storytelling. So that is 100% of the time. We'll say 99 just to be safe, but, you know, that is almost always the case with hypnosis in media, hypnosis in film and movies, film and TV rather, is always, there's this grain of truth, and then the rest of it is just like drama, fiction.
Yeah, and you also mentioned stage hypnotists.
Yeah.
Now we've all seen tricks where somebody claims to hypnotize other people instantly with a snap of the fingers or a tap on a shoulder, and they make someone bark like a dog or think they're the president or whatever. What are the underlying principles there? Like, how does stage hypnosis work? Or I know we think about the power of suggestion and anchoring and priming people.
Sure. So listen, you know, I have friends who are great stage hypnotists and mentalists who I would be happy to introduce you to. That would be better people to answer that question, because I'm not a stage hypnotist, and the bottom line is I don't know. But what I do know, there are a couple of things I can tell you. One, you know, with respect to really, really good stage hypnotists, which are essentially extraordinarily talented showmen and entertainers, men and women who do this. It's crazy. I mean, I'm with everybody else in the audience where it's just like, what the hell? You know, so when it's really a spectacle, I'm there with you.
Yeah.
Now, besides that, there are things I don't like. When any hypnosis show that exploits or embarrasses people for the
Mm,
enjoyment of others,
yeah,
I'm ultimately not okay with. That's not. I don't think we need to do that to be entertained.
sure.
And then what that is exploiting. Let's also notice these things. Where do they take place? High school graduations. I mean, places where ultimately you're usually going to have highly suggestible groups or just kids, just straight up kids,
Hmm.
college campuses, what have you. So what's at play most of the time there? But I would rather have people answer for themselves. But ultimately, we can agree on this much. And there are sociological principles of wanting to belong and not break the shared reality of the show. You know, the profiling usually that takes place at the beginning of a show, a stage hypnotist will ask so many people to stand up and ask a number of questions of the crowd and see if this person is open to their suggestions and if that person is shutting them down, and they will profile the crowd looking for people that are open and responsive to whatever they have in mind. And if they pick the wrong person, it's going to go the wrong way, which
Yeah.
is again why I say when people do this well, it's really an incredible skill. Like, I'm genuinely impressed and thrilled by these people. I could name a few. So yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead. What were you
that
gonna
no, that makes a lot of sense. That there's a lot more going on there than meets the eye. That as soon as we all walk into the room, whoever is the performer is already starting the work, laying the foundations. Whether it's
say?
by identifying the right kind of people that would be suggestible to their suggestions or their prompts.
And I'll say, there's one thing in my practice, again, because I am offering hypnosis for a very specific purpose, not a stage show. Um, there's one thing in my practice I do not do in response to stage hypnosis, and I'm vocal about it. It's misdirection, ultimately.
Mhm.
Is that although I'm using indirect suggestion consciously and constantly, I have I have no desire to and will never misdirect somebody, which is a core tenet of magic, magicians, hypnosis, illusions, etc.
Yeah.
which is just not what I am, Joey. At the end of
Well,
the day.
well, that's the difference between entertainment and an ethical practice.
Yes, thank you. Yes, very much so. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so let's rewind back to your childhood. So you grew up with your dad hypnotizing you for fun.
A little bit. I mean, he, it's pretty funny, really, because people now that I talk to, and I teach other hypnotists,
Hmm.
and whenever people ask me, should I practice on my kids, I always find it really funny because the short answer is yes. Go ahead. I mean, there's really no harm that can be done. I mean, be gentle in practice and help them with their grades or their tests or schools or performance and sports and stuff like that. It's beautiful to do,
Hmm.
and expect them to know your bullshit at all times. Like, don't expect your kids to take you seriously.
Yeah.
Because I have memories I look back on really fondly. Really, it's like heartwarming now. But my dad practicing essentially on my brother and he and I being completely uncooperative to what he was trying to accomplish. And looking back, again, really with nostalgia and sentiment more than anything, but it's just
Yeah.
funny because again, is the practice good? Yes, but just who we're working with matters.
Absolutely. And so you were growing up in a time where your father was working as a sort of pioneer in the field of regression therapy. And you had some experience meeting a lot of his peers and learning from them as well. Can you speak on that?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So in the 1990s, when I was a teenager, in my 13, 14, 15-year-old range, my dad was the president of the Association for Past Life Research and Therapies. And at the time, Joey, as you might imagine, mostly what I was like thrilled by was really just the social currency of this. That
Hmm.
I could say that to my friends in school and blow their minds, and I'm like, oh my God. Uh,
Yeah.
and and I was also sincerely drawn to his work at that age. Without needing to tell too much of these stories, it was a a tough time for my family. My parents were splitting up in the 90s and we were going through some stuff. Everybody had stuff to go through. I was a teenager, so I was going through stuff anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So, participating actually in these group experiences of past life regression that were led by my father when I was a teenager. They were usually on Sundays when I would hang out with my dad. It was very much my parents just separated. I'm going to hang out with dad on Sundays kind of thing. And he was working. And thankfully, I'd liked his work, and he and I were great friends his whole life. So it wasn't a problem. And I participated in these group experiences, and it helped me through the stuff I was going through as a teenager. I'll tell you the story of the first past life regression I ever had. I was a woman on the Great Plains of the United States in the 1800s during expansion into the West.
Mm-hmm.
I saw covered wagons. It was very Oregon Trail, but
Okay.
looked perhaps more like Arizona, the Devil's Thumb, or Utah, that area maybe.
Okay.
But so I had a husband who is very much like a caricature of the Monopoly man, a banker type that
Mm-hmm.
saw me as a possession and took me for granted, frankly. And we had 5 children, and I, over the course of a day, and I'm a 13 or 14-year-old boy at the time, mind you. I saw at the end of the experience a death scene where I was in a dissociated point of view, but I could tell it was still quote unquote me. It was this woman. And she died doing dishes. Her husband up and left her, took the kids. She didn't know what happened to her. She had no power. She couldn't do anything. And she died doing dishes. From what, I don't know. And that experience, so as I just mentioned, my parents were separating and I was going through all kinds of stuff. That experience, the message to my young mind, which I'm sure my dad probably did also help me out with a little bit. I don't remember our conversations around it, but was all about power and control. Again, what she was able to do and what she wasn't able to do. And I was able to apply that immediately to the sibling rivalry, which was extraordinarily intense with my brother. He and I, we have a wonderful relationship today. We're brothers,
Yeah.
so we had everything that teenage brothers could have in terms of just being at loggerheads at times.
Sure.
And
I have 2 brothers. I know all about that.
there you go, man. There you go. So
Yeah.
this experience was deeply informative to my relationship with my brother and our power and control dynamic. And I was able to apply it pretty instantly. So suffice it to say, at a very young age, I understood the usefulness of past life regression. And it was my introduction there also to hypnosis, to meditation, to philosophy, to reincarnation, to Buddhism, to a side of my father I wasn't aware of. So it was a definite initiation of sorts that happened. And it was many Sundays that this would happen in my teen years. So those were very, very important and formative experiences, for sure.
Yeah, I can imagine. So now that we've broached the topic of past life regression, and you just mentioned reincarnation. So I think that's kind of where most people's minds go when we talk about past life regressions. We think reincarnation. That's, at least for me, that was my first time hearing past life regression. Is like, okay, yeah, we've lived multiple lifetimes. Who was I before? In what time period? Was I someone important? Was I a man, a woman, a child that only lived a few years? Or what were these different situations and circumstances that my soul would have been in previous times? And now, from a clinical standpoint, there's also another interpretation that these are all archetypes and different situations that our subconscious needs us to work through, I suppose. I'll let you take it from here about
I appreciate it. Yeah.
yeah.
Essentially, Joey, my belief with past life regression is that we want to and are benefited by working from the widest possibility space in terms of what, I'm putting that in air quotes, what the experience is, as if it wouldn't be real. And when I say that, I'm not talking about the past life material. I'm talking about the person sitting there, the person sitting there. We're talking about this before,
Mhm.
but coming back to monkey mind, and there's this core principle in hypnosis that's very important in past life regression, that all hypnosis is self-hypnosis. So
Mm.
if I'm telling myself as I'm having a past life regression, this is a movie I saw with a book I read and a little bit of a dream I once had. This is bullshit. I'm not into this. And that's it. I've just completely invalidated that experience, whatever it may be,
Yeah.
even if it was silly. And if it had something to teach me, I'm out. I'm no longer available for that. So, you know, coming back to meditation and observation in that purity, being a seed of the experience at all times, being able to just accept the content that comes through past life regression, whether it's psychedelic or literal or metaphorical or whatever it is, is a genuine skill, for a competent and comfortable, experienced psychonaut. And the way I put it to my clients is that ultimately I defer to you as the expert on your own experience. I'm not here to tell you this is a past lifetime memory versus this is a dream you once had versus this is a fantasy or a metaphor. What I will say is that whether it is genuine past life material or a metaphorical journey created by your subconscious mind for a reason that has in it perhaps important symbols and metaphors, messages, what's important in the experience always is just that it be useful. And there's this question that I will ask in just about every session of past life regression, that what is the lesson here?
Mm.
Oftentimes I will ask it 10 times at different moments across the regression, and ask them eventually to put together the threads of the lessons that connect and how they intersect and why. Because ultimately, again, we're looking for tools, we're looking for resources. And coming back to states and physiology, that brain training, the more nonverbal, actually the more physiological the lesson is. We want it to be a state more than words. Words are good. Words are a good way of reminding ourselves what it's about. But ultimately, we want it in the nervous system. That's where the hypnosis comes in, and the subconscious part of it, that we talk about so often. But, in the abstract, I think few of us even understand what we're talking about. I'm speaking for myself there too.
Yeah.
So anyway, coming back to where I started, it's the widest possibility space.
Mm-hmm.
And Voltaire's quote where he says that it's not strange to be born twice instead of once. Everything in nature is resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
Everything in nature is resurrection. So I feel like that is a perfectly acceptable frame for reincarnation to me. Not that I understand the experience, and there's one or two more things I want to say before I stop rambling.
No, go ahead.
But just that another thing I try to be very, very clear about is that past life regression is a fascinating and often beautiful therapy, but it is not a good tool for proving or disproving the afterlife. And I'm not the first person to say that. There are a lot of people, I don't know if they're as vocal about it as I am, but a lot of people that do understand that and know. But for natural reasons, again, coming back to where you started, if I've never heard of it before, I'm going to assume there's some kind of I don't know, Hallmark card version of reincarnation I'm engaging with here or something like that. So I don't blame people for having whatever reference points or understanding that they have. Everybody's coming from where they're coming from.
Yeah.
And the last thing that I wanted to mention on it, I think I've forgotten, so I'll stop.
Okay. Now, one of the common threads that I'm pulling on from your explanations of hypnosis and regression therapy is that trance state. And you mentioned earlier getting into a flow state, and that kind of, I guess my separate interpretation of like the flow state is that deactivation of the prefrontal cortex, where we're not overthinking our actions and we're just operating at efficiency because we're not overthinking things and we're going with the flow, and things just seem to naturally be working out. Like when I have to explain flow state, I think about I use the example of, say, a professional snowboarder in the Olympics that is
Mhm.
going to do a massive jump off of this huge ramp, and if they're not completely in the groove in the moment, their mind and their body not connected, they're probably going to bust their ass pretty bad.
Mhm.
So I think, and I think of that in my own experience of as a DJ, like as a musician, like playing in the club, like I get into the
Oh yeah.
zone of
Music's a big one for flow, for sure.
definitely.
Yeah.
And I definitely think that music is a form of self-hypnosis for me, for sure. Like
Oh,
I'm definitely uh, in the moment, in the groove. I'm feeling it, and then I'm also, as a DJ, responding to the audience and giving and receiving their energy, and they're seeing what they're responding to and giving them back more of what's working, and kind of not paying neglecting what's not working. And I feel like that the music puts me in that flow state. And I think that's definitely
absolutely.
a form of hypnosis, where I'm in that certain state of mind. And extreme sports athletes are another example of being in a flow state. And I had not heard of that in comparison to being hypnotized, though. You're the first person that I've heard make that correlation, though I expect others have drawn that conclusion. But
It is a understanding of trance that is
mm,
relatively common, of course, to a hypnotist. You know, my bias is as a hypnotist,
yeah,
and my vocabulary as a hypnotist. But you know, again, I wouldn't expect others necessarily to see it that way. But understanding, I mean, again, speaking from my very biased opinion on the subject, I think it is extraordinarily useful and undervalued. I mean, the psychology of hypnosis, which actually it isn't that mysterious, but the problems are so significant, and there's like nobody giving attention to it. I think I might be the only person who thinks this is important. so you know,
okay,
I may be just alone in this, but again, there is an infinite amount of applicability and relevance from the psychology of hypnosis and trance states as we understand them to, again, the study of peak performance and flow as we're talking about it, positive psychology, also studies of anxiety relief, habit cessation, depression, you know, kind of the full gamut.
hmm
And it is also coming to a more nuanced understanding of hypnosis than the average person would even need to have, as understanding trance as being a utterly natural and common part of our attention. That every time we're looking at our computer screens, we're going into trance. Every time we look at our phones, there's light states of trance. You know, television screens and movie screens, of course. Good conversations put us into trance. Anxiety itself is a tight little uncomfortable trance.
mm.
You know, so being able to see those feedback loops of trance as they operate in our brains, in our psychology, our behavior, our language, and then being able to interrupt them. You know, now I'm talking about my intervention and hypnotherapy's intervention as being able to interrupt those feedback loops and, you know, add new suggestions, new ideas,
hmm
reframe things, break old things, and offer new things, et cetera, et cetera. So so yeah, it's just kind of a hypnotic frame and understanding and education that gives one this kind of lens on things. um, but again, you know, I wish more people had it, and I hold hypnotists responsible more than anybody else. Joey, it's unbelievable. Hypnotists are so concerned and focused on language,
mm.
yet just think about how silly the representation is in culture. I always have marveled at how hypnotists could simultaneously know so much about human attention and have such bad reputations.
That is really interesting.
Boggles the mind.
Yeah.
And I say that, you know, we were talking about purpose before. I consider myself very lucky. I love my work. I love hypnosis. I'm going to be working with the subject my whole life. I know that. So I say that from the inside, but I've always noticed that, and it has always, I've never understood it.
Well, I was going to pull on one thread, but I'm glad you mentioned that this being your purpose. And at what point in your life did you realize that that this was your calling and that you would make a career out of it, and you felt fulfilled doing so?
I had such, just it is a, it could only be a uh, the kind of uh, intersection of grace and luck, and if something like destiny exists, past lifetimes, quote unquote soul agreements between fathers and sons.
Mm-hmm.
I in my early 30s, it was actually the whole thing. It starts with my father's death. Really, there's preamble. There's years of training and my experience as a teenager and other trainings and things I would experience in my 20s. But in my early 30s, when my dad passed away, and it happened, over the course of 72 hours in many ways. It was,
Mm-hmm.
I look back on it now as a very, very quick transition that had years before it and years after it, but it happened as quickly as a person can die, really. And yeah, and the luck and the grace is just that it is the family business. Anybody who has even the slightest interest in continuing their family business and think they could be happy doing it, that's a very important point there, very
Yeah.
important asterisk. But anybody who's in that position, I suggest doing it as one who has, because it gives me tremendous meaning to be able to continue my father's work,
Mm-hmm.
but to do it in my own way, and to feel, without wanting to sound spooky or anything, I mean, to feel his support and presence in my work, essentially in our shared work, the family business. So, it's just something in the background that I uh, probably need to spend more time with, Joey, because I
Yeah.
might not think about that enough. And I know I'm so inside of it that I'm talking about myself here in a way that I could never really get on the outside of, could never fully see accurately.
Yeah.
um, but but I am tremendously fortunate. Now that comes with all kinds of other challenges, man. I have not had a conventional career path. All of the gifts and burdens that come along with accepting internships and corporate positions and 401ks and health benefits and all of that stuff I've had to navigate on my own. And all of that has actually made me a better entrepreneur. So I'm not upset about it, but these are things that happen.
That's certainly something I can also identify with, is not having a typical career path, and having to navigate um, existing in the world as an adult, and being independent in your thinking and not following a career corporate ladder, and uh, following your passions to an end where you can actually make a career out of them. So that's definitely something that I can identify with, the joys and the challenges of that as well.
Yeah,
So
it's a
um,
trade-off.
yeah, and that's also really beautiful that you have this connection to your father that you have through your work, that you were able to um, pick up all these gifts from him and all these skills during your time together, and then continue the work that he started and have that connection with him. That's a beautiful thing. So
Yeah, thank you. It is. Again, I feel blessed in that regard. I really do.
absolutely. Um, so there was another element after that trance state that I wanted to go back to, about. We touched on this a little bit earlier about experiences through past life regression, and touching on certain archetypes and certain maybe shared experiences, where you gave the example that in our previous conversation, not on tonight's, about people wanting to see if they were maybe Cleopatra in a past life, or we have potentially these different archetypal personalities that we can access. And I would love to get your thoughts on this collective unconscious, or this shared history that we all can kind of tap into.
Yeah, it's a, it's really a combination of different ideas that come from, Buddhism, Jung, Hinduism as well, and a lot of different traditions. But yeah, the collective consciousness or unconscious, however you want to phrase it,
Mm-hmm.
I feel, in my experience, in my vast experience of past life regression, if I may call it that, it seems more evident to me that we are pulling from a shared human history and a collective consciousness, as opposed to like Dan's past lives or Joey's past lives, or
Mm-hmm.
this individual kind of egoic, isolated experience of I am this one soul coming back to experience certain things in soul contracts with a soul group. you know,
Mm-hmm.
I put those in air quotes too. And again, with respect to the language that we inherited, I don't really care for those terms. First off, a contract is a
A binding
absolutely,
agreement.
well, besides that, a contract is an utterly human thing.
Mm.
The business metaphors are not applicable or helpful in past life regression. We are better off with natural metaphors, frankly, and better off thinking of the agreements and the entanglements that we have with our family members, loved ones, and partners as those of a root system of a tree under the earth, as opposed to, again, a contract that we would sign in some ether or interlife, which, and these are, the interlife is something in past life regression and regression therapy, this space between lives where we set things up for the next life. But the only way that that space is accessed and the work that is done there, again, we must remember, it's always done, we must notice anyway, it's done through human metaphors. We imagine the interlife as a library or a hall of records or a place with many books and places that we can access. We find and work with the information. Essentially what I'm saying is through the apparatus that we know. And this is, you were mentioning this before too, man, but this is where extraterrestrial experiences become really interesting as well. The
Mm.
people that I've worked with to remember abduction stories, and the people that I've worked with around ET experiences of any sort. One of the things we need to consider immediately, which is so fascinating, and some of the movies have approached this too, but it's just that, maybe space, time, and language don't work the same way for this other being. I mean, and how do they communicate? How do they understand time? One of the most interesting moments that came out of a session I did with somebody around an abduction story, and I again, like, I don't know what I don't know, so I'm afraid that
Yeah.
there's not like a big thing behind this I can share, but just to say that the end point we got to in the last session that we did was the abduction was less like something we would see in a movie where, a beam of light sucks somebody up into a flying saucer or
Yeah.
something, and more like somebody cutting out a piece of cake and placing it over here. That the time and space that the person existed in was cut out of the time and space and placed somewhere else.
Interesting.
And yeah. And so it really kind of baffled and defied all these, again, movie references we
Mm-hmm.
have for abduction, not any way it might actually happen, which is both horrifying and exciting to imagine. But yeah, so I don't know how I got on that tangent, man, but
Well, I'm
there's a
always
lot there.
excited, but when anyone brings up extraterrestrials and aliens,
Sure. It's a
any
fascinating subject.
and for anyone who knows me, I've been lifelong interested in that. And to tie it into this conversation, before my session with you earlier today, I had expressed my curiosity in the subject. And as a child, I was completely fascinated by it. And I can kind of trace it back to 1997, the 50th anniversary of Roswell, and there being a gray alien on the cover of Time magazine in a supermarket checkout stand. And I remember having to have that when I was grocery shopping with my mom. And I was also like a big X-Files fan at the time, only being 12 years
Great
old,
show.
but oh yeah, still one of my favorite shows of all time. And I just picked up every book or movie or anything that I could, or toy on the subject of ETs and UFOs and stuff like that. And as we were preparing for our session today, I had expressed to you that I had a bit of an obsession with aliens as a kid, and I was curious if I had ever had a personal abduction experience. And I appreciated that you took it seriously, and it was your attitude towards that subject was professional and both open to the possibility, but also not jumping to any kind of conclusions either way. So I appreciated that. And just to disclose, in the duration of our session, I did not have any ET abduction experiences that came up this time, but
That we
I
know of.
that we know
That we
of.
know of, Joey. That we
Yes,
were there for.
yes.
Yeah.
Well, that came up in today's session, but I'm looking forward to future sessions with you where we can see what else comes up.
Memory retrieval is its own subject too. Yeah, and I don't want to start us off on another tangent if there's something else that you wanted to mention, but memory retrieval and working with the memory in hypnosis is another kind of sticky area, because again, it really makes us ask the question again, wait, how does memory work? What are we
Hmm.
doing when we're actually remembering something? What does that mean? The etymology of the word remember, if we just think about it, even means to reoccupy, to remember, to become, you know, a member of the experience again. So yeah, the function of memory is, an important thing to get just some shared vocabulary around before we start going looking for things, because it's all through the filter of the present. It's all through the filter of uh, the context that we're in.
Yeah, I'm
So yeah,
actually happy to pull on that thread of memory and memory
sure.
recovery. As a student and person who's fascinated by the ET community, there are several people who have come forward publicly with claims of recovered memories of their
Hmm.
time either being abducted or actually in the employ of the secret space program. And employed by certain unofficial government agencies that operate in outer space, and they've come back with some very fantastic tales of fleets of intergalactic travel and uh,
Cool.
yeah, and experiences with a multitude of ET races. And there's a few people that have come out publicly about that, and they have some really interesting things to say. And people like Corey Good, who had a show on Gaia for a while, and also
Mm.
Laura Eisenhower, the granddaughter of President Eisenhower, is
Hmm.
a person who's come forward claiming to have been part of the secret space program and having spent time on Mars and stuff like that, and during uh, I guess regression therapy or memory recovery under hypnosis has it been able to bring forth some memories that were apparently covered up after those experiences.
Wow. I'm unaware of these stories. Please share the
Uh,
links with me later.
oh, it's a rabbit hole. It's a lot of fun. I'll definitely I'll share that with you.
For anybody watching too who's interested, there's a great book. I shared it with you before, Joey, but Communion by Whitley Strieber is a great book about an experience of an abduction story and somebody working with a hypnotist and regression therapist to retrieve the memories. But yeah, what I was going to mention before is just that in a lot of the court cases where hypnosis shows up, especially in England and in Europe, memory retrieval is usually part of it. And it's usually some kind of bunk or bogus, or I don't know, some misuse and misunderstanding of, again, how and how memory retrieval with hypnosis can work and is helpful, and then what we're doing when we remember something. And I'll just say it comes down to this ultimately, and I don't claim to be the final authority on memory or anything. So it is always a conversation with the client. I want to make sure that we have ultimately a shared and agreed upon vocabulary and understanding of expectations. But that when we're remembering something, even in hypnosis, in the deepest trance of hypnosis, the person is still in the chair before me. I'm still watching their body language. So it's really just important to remember we're not stepping into a time machine and accessing a static memory, a static re-experiencing of what it was as it was. But instead, we are going back through the filters of our memory, most of them emotionally composed, not intellectually, not reasonably, emotionally, through whatever we felt about it. And then, the rather apt metaphor of we're taking a photograph of a photograph. And every time we remember it again, we're taking a photograph of that photograph, not the original. It's to stick with that metaphor, it's almost as if when the negative's gone, it's gone. So it all happens through these emotional filters that happen through the limited capacity of the brain. And that doesn't mean that we can't access useful information, true information. I'm not saying it's all false or anything. I'm just saying that we have to have this understanding of the nuance of it. And that with this balance, then actually we're very equipped to go through the experience and get something really useful that we can pull through and work with.
And that kind of makes me think about how our brain functions as a pattern recognizing machine, and how our synapses tend to get stronger in things that are familiar, and how we kind of attach ideas and experiences to other ones that are similar so we can access them faster. So that could be a component in how memory works, is we kind of equate things that are similar to other experiences and kind of group them together.
Confirmation bias is a very real thing, man. And I've got examples of this all over my practice. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but people that come in, a totally hypothetical example here, but if somebody comes in wanting to remember where they put their keys, and they think they put their keys, or I should say they think they left their keys in a cab, and they can't find the cab and the keys are gone. That suspicion is going to be taking up so much space in the scene, that, and it'll be relatively impossible to confirm or deny. And, everything will have to happen kind of around it, unless we can talk enough about it to just kind of deflate it and push it aside, which totally can be done, but it takes this kind of level-headed conversation. So, so again, it's a nuanced thing. And what I just try to avoid, ultimately, last words on it, when people come into my office for memory retrieval, I don't want people to think they're getting that time machine experience, because I think that's setting up the absolute wrong expectation. And that's how we get in trouble with it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay. No, that's super interesting, and I'm sure we could get a lot deeper on that topic. But there was one other thing that I wanted to ask about, that we kind of went on another way, back to the collective unconscious, and you mentioned was it the interlife? Is that? That's the place.
One of the terms, for the Bardo states, as they call them in Buddhism.
Bardo, and I'm curious if that could be another term for, say, the Akashic records, or like the Book of Life.
Yes.
And
in a Venn diagram, Joey, all of these things overlap. They all have their own kind of distinct identities in this ecosystem, but also, yes, all of these ideas overlap.
Yeah, I would love to touch on this a little bit more of how some people have been able through trance state or meditation or just born with the innate ability to access these types of realms and this type of information. For example, someone like Edgar Casey, if you're familiar with his work, where he was
Very.
the sleeping psychic, they called him, and he had an incredibly high success rate of diagnoses where he would kind of go into a trance state and tell people exactly what was going on in their life, or had some pretty spectacular predictions as well. And
Yeah.
we had actually postponed this interview 1 week. Initially, I wanted to schedule our talk to be around Halloween because I thought that would be very interesting to do a past life regression session on Halloween or Dia de los Muertos, at that time of year where spiritual people will believe that the veil is very thin between the living and the dead and that kind of thing. So I thought it would be very interesting to do that our session during that time. But then I had the opportunity to become initiated into a lineage of Akashic Records reading, which is a very interesting topic that I've been learning a lot about lately, about accessing this state of information that's kind of above our normal plane of functioning, where we can ask for guidance from either ascended masters or other beings or keepers of this knowledge, where we can kind of access these other forms of information in the collective consciousness. And I just find that so intriguing, and I'm really curious to get your take on people's abilities to access this bardo state or this interlife.
Yeah. So, all traditions, I should say most traditions, the ones I'm aware of anyway, have their own distinctions for these ecstatic states and these
Mhm.
kinds of, peak experiences of various sorts. Uh, feats of magical healing, spiritual healing.
Mhm.
So deep trance hypnosis and regression therapy and the Akashic records. More than that, even the history of the medium's parlor and things like this. They have, again, they all kind of overlap historically and in the ecosystem. And I do think it's worth mentioning too that all of these things also have changed in the last 20 years. The age of social media and smartphones and everything else have not necessarily killed these things. In some cases, they made them stronger, but
Mhm.
they've definitely changed them, no doubt. And again, I don't know who's looking at the history, but one of the things that's just about always missing, and in the popular trending stories anyway, is a long-term memory of where these things begun and how they evolved and stuff like that. So it's just always helpful to have that context and that zoomed out awareness of, oh, this connects to this and connects to that, connects to this. So to come back to those ecstatic states, yes, I'm with you. They are, well, I mean, they're certainly depicted and described to us as a thing to kind of aspire to or aim to or get to. But I personally, I don't know if that's the case. I've have friends, for instance, I've talked to who have worked with psychedelic medicines far stronger than any psychedelic medicines I've ever worked with.
That was going to be my next question, but
Yeah,
yeah, I'll let
yeah, yeah.
you.
And there's some things, 5-MeO DMT, for instance, that I'm just like, I'm all good with that. And the story for anybody who doesn't know, um, it's extracted first of all from the glands of a frog, as I understand it, and then the experience is very quick, takes place over 5 minutes to 30 minutes to an hour, something like that. But it is a maybe you've experienced this, Joey, I don't know, but it's an extraordinary simulation of death. Just a brief and soul-shattering kind of simulation
Yeah.
of death.
For those listening that might not be familiar with DMT, our brain produces this molecule dimethyltryptamine at the moment of birth and at the moment of death, and it is it's been synthesized in a form that can be extracted from frogs, or in certain plant medicines, like the brew of ayahuasca has similar effects to the compounds of this molecule, giving psychedelic experiences that can range from a few minutes or a few seconds if you're smoking this synthesized DMT, or if you're drinking the brew of ayahuasca or something similar, it can last very several hours, where we're having these kinds of
Mm, mm,
experiences. And full disclosure, I have not yet drank ayahuasca. I think that's something that I may do in the future. But I have smoked DMT in college, and that was very quickly transported to a place that was very difficult to describe, and a lot going on in a very, very short amount of time, very intense. And I was definitely scared at the time. I was like 20 years old, and
mm.
not knowing what to expect. But
Would you
yeah.
recommend it to people, the
uh,
experience?
I mean, this is 15 years ago, so I feel like
Sure.
maybe I would try it again one more time myself before recommending it to anyone else.
That
It's
sounds
not an
fun.
experience that I'm looking for, but I mean, it's not something that I would be completely against as well. Like, anyone who knows me knows that I'm against most drugs for my own personal use. I don't really partake in recreational narcotics at all. I don't even drink
Yeah,
anymore. But
right on. Good for
um
you.
yeah, I've this past year, thank you, I've been really focused on my own meditation practice and my own spiritual journey, and trying to connect to higher states of consciousness that way. But being in the spiritual community, a lot of my friends have done many ceremonies with ayahuasca or bufo or any of these other
Yeah.
uh, type psychoactive entheogenic type plant medicines.
Yeah. Yeah, I am a vocal and ardent advocate for the legalization of cannabis. I'm very pleased about, some of the recent some of the recent laws that were passed, and some of the all of the research around psilocybin and mushrooms that's taking place. And Joey, I'm with you in that I'm there's just a cavalier attitude. Certainly there had been, I don't know, post 2020, we're on a different track now, but, before this year, there was a very cavalier attitude with psychedelics in the New York wellness scene. And it was
Mm.
basically just like, I don't mean to cast aspersions or anything, but it felt sometimes like recreational use, just, slightly to the left. It didn't feel like uh, uh, a true mindfulness of set and setting and things like this. Not in all contexts, anyway. And there are certainly people that elevated it. And I should be full disclosure here. I come from a family that, as I mentioned, my parents separating in the '90s. My family was kind of devastated by addiction. So, I actually, before I had any substance in my bloodstream, I was in Families Anonymous meetings and Narcotics Anonymous meetings. So I'm very heightened and attuned around these subjects and these conversations, because, again, that they had a great effect on my upbringing in my life. They still do. Uh, so so yeah, it's such a balance, because I feel like yourself, man, we have to experience these things. We have to experiment with them. As kids, we have to. It's what we're supposed to do when we're young. But how do we do that in a safe way? How do we experiment and mind the boundaries at the same time? How do we mind set and setting and still have fun? It's really, I certainly don't know what that universal prescription would be. And on one hand, I want to be encouraging of the experimentation, and on the other hand, I feel it's very important. And maybe it's just because I'm a professional in my early 40s now, as opposed to a kid in my 20s or teens, but just this sense of safety first. So
Absolutely. I also agree with a lot of the new regulations, and just from the point of view of harm reduction.
yes,
And
yes,
I think that and also mandatory minimums on sentencing and the whole criminal justice system, and the whole war on drugs was just a complete disaster for its stated intentions, though I have,
Drugs won.
yeah,
Drugs won.
drugs won the war on drugs. That was one of the best
Yeah,
memes of this week for sure.
for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, I definitely have I've seen in the New York scene, particularly people taking psychedelics recreationally in parties and stuff like that, where that kind of puzzled me. Where I've had wonderful experiences with psilocybin, and I consider that to have been a pivotal, life-changing moment when I was about 17 or 18 the first time I tried that,
Mm.
and that completely changed my perspective on the world. And
I had a life-changing event at 27 with mushrooms, utterly life-changing. That I felt, you know, as they talk about ayahuasca, and pardon my interrupting you there, but you know, they talk about Mother Ayahuasca and the intelligence in the plant. You know,
Mhm.
this is why I am a fan of psilocybin and mushrooms. You know, I have had positive experiences with LSD, but I'm generally a little less comfortable with stuff that comes out of labs. You know, I just want to trust, you know, sources.
Yeah.
But anyway, all that said, the intelligence in the plants. I had real quick. I went through a breakup with somebody I was at the time pretty much in love with, if not infatuated with. A breakup that had to happen, and it was devastating. It was heartbreaking, but it was, you know, it was this moment that really set me on a path in life that, looking back, was absolutely the right path. You know, this was
Mm.
something that had to happen. So anyway, yeah, I am a big believer in the intelligence of the plants. And coming back to what we were saying before, you know, I just want people to be safe. I don't mean to sound like I'm killing anybody's buzz or anything, because I think we need to do these things. We need to experiment to have the experience, but I just want people to do it safely and respectfully.
Absolutely. And to your point, where to natural substances versus things coming out of labs, like I definitely think if we could uh, legalize cannabis in more places, or uh, psilocybin or other more natural things, that could be a deterrent for opioid addiction. I think if people
Yes,
can get these states of consciousness that they're seeking through more natural means that don't have these long lasting side effects, that I think that would definitely be very helpful with the opioid crisis in this country.
I agree. I agree. I'm confident in New York's oncoming legalization because New Jersey just legalized cannabis, and I doubt Cuomo wants our tax dollars going across state lines. So
Right.
I have a feeling it's going to happen in New York relatively soon. We'll see though.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few more things that I'd like to come back around to.
Please.
We in my session earlier today, one of the other things that I mentioned before we began the exercise was I was curious if I had any guides, any energies or entities or ancestors or angels or anyone that was looking out for me, that would be present and vocal to make their presence known. And while the product of our session today, where I was able to really identify my own resistances to these kinds of subjects, I wasn't able to clearly identify any particular guide, but I was able to really identify my own resistance to this type of thing. I think that was definitely some progress that we made in this in our session today. But yeah.
I had a thought after your session too that, you know, maybe resistance was your guide. You know, just this idea that engaging resistance as the guide, which we did a little bit, even, you
Mhm.
know, and to give people context, you know, when resistance comes up, it's a gift. It's not a bad thing. You know, usually we're there actually. It's usually more about spotting the resistance. We're there to clear avoidant behavior and unconscious fear. And, you know, what is that resistance but unconscious fear and some kind of latent avoidance? So when resistance comes to the surface in this way, it's actually a real gift. And you know, it's not my story to tell, Joey. So I don't want to say
Yeah.
anything about your session, but the nuance in the conversation around trust, guidance, you know, listening to ourselves in a certain way, yeah, I felt. was at least beginning to unravel the knot, you know?
Yeah, I went into our session today not with any real expectations. It was just more of a genuine curiosity, like what's going to happen. But I definitely went in with an open mind. But as we went into the exercises, I was revisited by my own resistance that I've even had through my meditation practice over the years. Is that there's certain uh, blockages in my own subconscious that kind of get in my way of visualizing a beautiful, calm, peaceful locale, or other ideas that are of the guided meditation or things like that, where I always kind of pick things apart and I question them. And I think that that was very important for my own self-reflection, that
Mm.
when I'm putting myself in these kinds of states, or I'm trying to open myself up to these experiences, that I find myself, even in my most wanting to be receptive, in my own most relaxed states, even my subconscious, I guess, is picking holes in things and trying to find reasons why it won't work. And
May I
I
interject?
yeah, please.
Actually, if you want me to give you my true intuition, I think it's your conscious mind that's picking things apart. I think your
Yeah.
subconscious mind is actually much closer to a true believer. If
Hmm.
there was any kind of distinction between the two, they might just agree completely. I don't know, you're the authority on you.
Yeah.
But you know, I think it's your conscious mind that's actually distracting itself by picking all these things apart, and it's your subconscious that keeps bringing you back to the experience and wanting it.
I think that is probably very true, because I want to be a believer. Because if anyone who listens to me on this show, yeah,
You're doing a
yeah,
podcast. I don't know if you know that, but you
yeah,
know, you're hosting a whole thing right here.
absolutely. Like I want to have these experiences, but yeah, I guess it's my conscious mind, like maybe uh, being afraid to take the full leap and like jump right in, or just trying to protect myself, or I'm not
Well,
sure what it is, but
you also mentioned during our session skepticism, and I would
yeah,
just come back to skepticism is not unhealthy. You know, sometimes it can be warranted or unwarranted. It's always a matter of just educating ourselves and asking questions. And, you know, we can confirm or reject whatever it was. But, you know, yeah, skepticism, it's healthy. It's healthy. It's your discerning reason. But again, there is a balance, and you know, coming back to the purity of meditation and that observation, that surgical, laser focused observation of ourselves, being able to activate and deactivate those faculties and know this is my discernment finding the gold here versus this is my skepticism shutting down my own ability to benefit from this, you know. And there might be some gradients in between there too, but being able to navigate that for ourselves, again, skilled psychonautics,
hmm
you know, tremendously skilled, it because the self-hypnosis of it is the most difficult thing to disengage from, you know, to allow ourselves to forget Joey, to forget Dan for a moment.
Yeah, you know what's really interesting is that in this conversation tonight, using the term psychonaut and psychonautics, this is the first time that I've ever heard it used in reference without psychedelics.
You know? And maybe the term only applies with the use of psychedelics. I really don't know, but I was under the impression that it's just anybody who does inner work is in that moment a psychonaut.
That
I
could
could,
very
I
well
could be.
be. I,
We'll have to go to the dictionary, I guess.
yeah. No,
Can
that
I
yeah, go ahead.
can I share with you one story about guides before we move on from
Please.
that subject?
That was what I wanted to get into, is like closing that chapter on guides.
Cool.
So
Yeah.
please go
And
ahead.
then speaking of closing too, my wife's making dinner, so I'll probably have to go pretty soon.
Yeah, I just one more closing after this story, then one more book ending another topic, and I think we
Sounds
can
good.
call it an evening.
So when I was in Turkey once with my father, when he was training a group of regression therapists, psychologists, and doctors in regression therapy and past life regression in Turkey, I had this experience that was guided by some of his students. I was the subject, and they were practicing a relatively simple spirit guide exercise where under hypnosis, I was directed to a place in a state not unlike what we started doing today, where I was engaged with and speaking with a spirit guide. And up to this point, I had done this exercise many other times in many other experiences, most of them led by my dad. And just about always, the guide showed up as a dog. Usually, the dog looked like my childhood dog, but not always. And the dog and I would just play. These were generally very positive and joyful experiences. It's funny because in these spirit guide exercises, usually there would be questions, things like, ask your guide, what's the purpose of my lifetime? Why was I born to the family that I was born to? Why was I born in the place and time I was born into? And, I would ask the dogs this question and they would look at me like dogs. And
Mhm.
so it was like, very funny. But I'd never needed it to be more. I was actually always perfectly satisfied that my guides were dogs. And I think my dad even probably said, he's like, if it's an animal, that's fine. And I've always been a dog lover. So
Mhm.
anyway, in Turkey, I'm doing this exercise and all of a sudden, out of the mist steps this matriarchal grandmotherly figure, an older woman with these silver long ringlets, a long green gown. She looks like she stepped out of the Lord of the Rings or something.
Mhm.
And she's looking at me like she's my grandmother, and she just loves me. And I can't help but instantly feel that love and give it right back to her. And it was like a fairy godmother vision or something. It was, I mean, if I were to draw you a picture of it, it would look kind of silly.
Okay.
Uh, but I was utterly immersed in the reality of this scene. And my father's students, who were Turkish, English not their first language, were instructing me to ask her all kinds of questions. What's the purpose of this lifetime? Why was I born to my family? Why was I born in the place and time I was born to? Every time I would ask her these questions, she would lean in, Joey, and she would just go like that. She would just like sweetly dismiss me.
Mhm.
And each time I thought it was really funny. I would start laughing and just really kind of appreciated the way she was looking at me. And eventually I was asked to ask her, why won't you answer my questions? And the response she gave me, which was the only thing she actually said with her lips moving, was, you know too much. And I
Mm.
could have taken that message straight to the ego. Like, I have all the answers. I know what I'm doing. I'm 27. I have all, I need, whatever. And I knew as she said that, what she was referencing actually was all the times I had done this exercise previously with these dogs, and all of the previous experience that it seemed like she was aware of. Like,
Mm.
like she knew about. She's like, you've done this a lot. I've seen your file, Daniel.
Yeah.
uh, and and managed to tell me without telling me, which was a bit of a reminder, but really the first time it sunk in, that, this can very easily sound like a platitude, but again, let's think of the physiology and states, that it's the feeling that matters. I could tell you, I could put in words for you the purpose of your lifetime. I could tell you you're here to conquer your fear. I could tell you, you're here to have a purposeful life. You already know those words.
Mm.
What would it feel like? What's the feeling worth to you? Do you know that? So it was a fucking clear bell. It was just beautiful.
Yeah.
And I had this message in a very indirect way that was given and received by me. And that was, now the thing with that, man, which can't be reproduced, is that was after years of having done this exercise previously. It
Mhm.
took a long time to get to that. But
Yeah.
that's why we peel away the layers of the onion. That's why you do it more than once. You don't have to do it 1,000 times. There's definitely too much.
Yeah.
But yeah. So anyway, I wanted to share that story with you because it's an unconventional guide story.
Mhm.
But guide work, again, it's something I deeply believe in. I've had wonderful experiences with my own guides, and I've seen people have their own. So it is worth the time.
Got it. Well, I look forward to exploring more in that direction, and I would think we'll try and touch on that in our next session. The last thing that I wanted to come back to that we brought up
Yes.
earlier in the session that I thought we would kind of get into towards the end was the work of Adam Curtis in the Century of the Self. because I think that would be a very apt way to
Yeah,
conclude this conversation, with the idea of mass hypnosis, or just in the forms of media, in marketing, advertising. And right now we live in the day and age of the 24-hour news cycle, and just constant misdirection. And it seems like hypnosis of sound bites, whether it's like build a wall, lock her up, I can't breathe, any of these things, that they're
hypnotic anchors.
exactly.
Yeah, Joey, I mean, this is a huge subject that we don't have time for.
Sure. Of course.
and and um, know this: education is inoculation. And when I was saying before that hypnosis as a subject is so fascinating, it's such a worthwhile study. And I do think it's a shame. I mean, there's a crisis of education in a way. There is a crisis of education we're all aware of if we just look at the stats in the US. But then, there's like missing pieces in a more nuanced and specialized education around our psychology, where competent, legitimate information about hypnosis and trance psychology would be really useful to a population hypnotized by their phones.
Yeah.
So education is inoculation. A lot of the things that we're probably all already aware of and doing for ourselves, I would say, in terms of emotional intelligence and turning things off, turning off notifications is, a way of controlling your attention. But I suppose I'll end with this idea that, I wish I could remember who said it. It may have been Roger McNamee, who wrote the book Zucked, who was originally, he was on the Facebook board, but now he is lobbying and advocating for breaking up the tech companies.
Mm.
And so, he was there when it all got started. And he just refers to the phones and the apps as slot machines in a casino constantly gaming our attention, essentially.
Mm.
And the quote from The Social Dilemma that a friend of mine reminded me about, that there's only one other business that calls their user base users.
Oh yeah.
drugs
Yeah.
drugs
Yeah.
of course I'm referring to.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, yeah, in terms of hypnosis and the media, I mean, it's a whole other podcast, my friend, which I'd be more
Sure.
than happy to have, longer conversation about that.
Part two. Let's make it happen.
There you go. But education is inoculation. I say to people, trust your own means of self-care. Look for wellness tips in unconventional places.
Mm-hmm.
Comedians, athletes, convicts, even
Yeah.
usually, sometimes have good rules to live by. But yeah, education is inoculation.
Absolutely. And mentioning comedians, I find that comedy has been one of the most accurate ways to get truth in the news in the last few years. I think some comedians are definitely telling more factual representation of what's actually going on in the world than a lot of the major news networks.
Well, yeah, and I mean, we'll end with this, but especially over the course of the last 4 years, and without wanting to make any political statements, when we have people within the system that are essentially hostile towards reasonable communication and conversation, when there's an active assault on reason,
Yeah.
it becomes way more important.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a great place to wrap it up for tonight. Dan, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you, Joey. It was a pleasure.
I want to highly recommend anyone listening to check out your podcast, Mindspace Minimal.
Mindspace Minimal. Thank you. Yeah, with Jessica Yatrovsky.
Yeah, who's also wonderful. She's going to be on this show coming up pretty soon. And I've listened to most of the episodes of your show, and
wonderful. Thanks, man.
Really enjoyed all of them that I've listened to so far.
I wanted to offer to you, Joey, and anybody listening tonight too, I have a master class in past life regression, and we're having the last class for the fall tomorrow evening. If anybody would like to come and audit that class or be part of it for free, you're welcome as a guest. Just get in touch with me. If you can send me a message, danielryancrt@gmail. Happy to have you as part of the group tomorrow night for that class. If you'd like to have an experience of past life regression now and just continue the conversation.
Excellent. And for those of you watching that are members of Luxury Attaché, you can reach out to your attaché to book a session with Dan. And yes, so the name of your book is, tell me one more
Meditation,
time.
Hypnosis, and Past Life Regression.
Yes.
And
And
it's coming out in 2021.
okay, excellent. So at Daniel Ryan CRT on Instagram, right?
Yep. Yep.
Uh,
And DanielRyanCRT.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us, Dan. This has been super, super cool. And I really enjoyed the session earlier today. Looking forward to booking another session with you very soon. I will most likely be joining you tomorrow night. And
Great, man. Great.
would love to have a part 2 of this episode where we can get into some of those other topics a little bit deeper. So
Hypnosis and media coming soon.
yes, absolutely. All
All
right.
right, man.
Thank you so much to everyone
Thank
who's
you.
been watching us tonight and listening to this later. And have a great night. And thank you so much, Dan. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye now.
Bye.